Hi, everyone. Welcome to Café IBTTA. I'm Pat Jones. My guest today is Dr. Barbara Gannon. Barbara is a leadership consultant and clinical psychologist with practical experience across the transportation sector. As principal of GannonConsult, Barbara is respected for her expertise in workforce strategy and in the design and delivery of professional development programs. Throughout her career, Barbara has trained and mentored more than 2,000 transportation professionals, many of whom now serve as general managers and executive team managers in transportation organizations all around the world. Her consulting experiences include facilitating forums and retreats, ensuring successful partnering on transportation construction projects, designing workforce development plans, and guiding the strategic planning process. And of course, all of us know that Barbara is the director of IBTTA's Leadership Academy since its inception in 2008. Barbara, welcome to Café IBTTA. It's great to have you with us.
It's always fun, Pat, to have a conversation with you and with the entire IBTTA audience. So good morning.
Good morning. Amen. Well, this is Café IBTTA, where we drink coffee and talk about things that are interesting, relevant, uplifting, and fun. And I know we're going to have a fun time today with Dr. Barbara Gannon. But first off, a big shout out to Bill Kramer, IBTTA's communications director, who happens to be having a big birthday today. Bill has worked with IBTTA for almost 8 years and leads the Moving America Forward public awareness campaign. Bill is a dogged, persistent, and effective communications director, and as Jim Ely would say, a shameless promoter of IBTTA and the tolling industry. If you see a positive story about tolling in a major trade publication or mainstream media, chances are Bill Kramer had a hand in that. The Tolling Points blog, the IBTTA Smart Brief that you read religiously every morning, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and other social media are all part of Bill's portfolio. So, happy birthday, Bill, and thanks for all you do. Also, this is membership renewal time. We sent the membership renewal packets in late October, so you should have received your packet by now. If you have any questions, please contact Terry Langford. Also, there's a 2021 membership renewal page on our website featuring videos by these two guys, Samuel Johnson and Mark Compton, our current and incoming presidents. There are also a bunch of testimonials from other IBTTA members. Please support IBTTA by renewing your membership today. And thank you all for your tremendous support throughout this challenging year. Well, we are taking your questions. Use the chat function and select all panelists and attendees. And we want to get you started right away. So in the chat function, type one word or phrase that describes your feelings about the IBTTA Leadership Academy and or Dr. Barbara Gannon. One word or phrase in the chat function that describes your feelings about the Leadership Academy or Barbara Gannon. Essential, awesome, curious, amazing, transformational, encouraging, enlightening. Dr. Gannon is fantastic, empowering, excellent program, insightful, excellence, life-changing, great for building leaders. Beautiful, beautiful. We love these responses. Again, life-changing. All right. Beautiful. Motivational, outstanding education, another life-changing. Barbara, this is wonderful. It's clear that the Leadership Academy has had a very powerful effect on many lives, and we'll talk about that in a little while.
Great.
But first, I want to ask you about, a part of your career that maybe not so many people in the tolling industry know about. You spent an important part of your career in the transit industry, and I'd like you to tell us a little bit about that, some of the challenges you encountered, maybe some of the leadership lessons you learned.
Great, Pat. It's isn't that fun to see the enthusiasm about the Leadership Academy? And yes, we'll talk about that a little bit later. I was embedded in transit for 15 years before I joined the Eno Foundation and began to expand my surface transportation experience. I expanded it first to the highway sector. I taught mid-manager and senior level courses for AASHTO, the American Association of State Highway Officials. And then I met Carrie Witt. And Carrie Witt was in transit and in tolling and came to a transit course and introduced me to IBTTA, and the Academy and all says that is the history. I think that I really have a solid surface transportation experience, surface transportation mostly, though I have followed over the years all modes. And introduced through my work with the Conference of Minority Transportation Officials. You ask about a leadership lesson. So my lesson comes from early days in transit, where I launched a 5-county regional rural transit authority. And then I was an operations manager in the Port Authority in Pittsburgh, an operations manager on a bus garage. The lesson that I needed to learn was the lesson of telling the story. So the story in the 5-county rural transit agency was, how do we tell a story to 5 different counties why it is important to have consolidated transportation services? That was one story I needed to tell. The other story was answering this question: why should 400 union employees follow a 30-year-old woman to run a bus garage? I had to be able to tell my story, to be able to tell the story of why it was important what my role could do to help them to do their jobs that they knew and they were the experts in. And as you know, Pat, telling stories, that's what you do. That certainly is what Bill Kramer does beautifully. Happy birthday, Bill. Stories help us to learn what we have in common with other people. They help us connect. We get to listen to somebody else's story. And I think that was, what is the story? What is my story? What is your story? Was the big leadership lesson for me.
That's wonderful. I love the notion of telling a story, and people kid me all the time that I'm always using metaphors and maybe some strange or very large stretched metaphors. But I think it all comes back to story. You have to tell, if you want to communicate with people, you have to communicate with them using stories and references that have meaning for them. And I think you do a wonderful job of that, of helping people identify with lessons by bringing stories to them that are understandable and accessible and meaningful. So well done.
And I would say you often tell stories by singing songs. So there you go.
There you go. I think the basis of a song is always a story, of love or heartache or, a broken down truck or something like that. Yeah. I think that's probably a whole other Café IBTTA, storytelling through songs, huh? Well, Barbara, you are a clinical psychologist, and you worked in a state hospital for a part of your career, and you had some life-changing formative experiences. You had a unique opportunity to put your psychology skills to use, but you also had a chance to learn from others. Would you tell us about that?
I would. I went from a bus garage to a high-tech company, and then into clinical psychology. I think this is also a lesson in telling stories and listening to other people's stories. I was 45. I was enrolled in a doctoral program in clinical psychology. I felt like I needed the theory and the practice of psychology to inform the work that I did with healthy adults in the industry. In the 5-year course of my clinical study, I served year-long internships, 5 of them actually. to try to apply that theory and practice to this vital on-the-job experience that I needed. So one internship was in a locked unit at a state hospital in Massachusetts, people at their most vulnerable, and they didn't certainly leave their stories behind when they entered the hospital. I was supervised by Dr. Matt Dumont, who was a longtime community psychologist, and he worked in poverty-stricken neighborhoods in Boston. He came to the state hospital system because a well-meaning, I put a question mark after that, governor closed all the community mental health treatment centers in Boston, and people were moving quickly to state hospitals instead. Matt taught me one life lesson, and that was that in his work in community mental health, that the appearance of mental illness in communities and in people in communities is often no more than a reaction to their poverty and their inability to improve their circumstances and get basic needs covered. We often jump to what is going on, how is someone ill, and it must be mental illness, when in fact it is circumstances in which they live. That's a pretty good life lesson. The other, when we go into the state hospital, Matt Dumont and I would lead what was called Wednesday morning meeting. And it was the first class of the day for the residents of the third floor of the state hospital. I greeted people as they came into morning meeting and ready to join the conversation. You know, we sat in a circle, of course. Typically, morning meeting would be the residents would one by one repeat their names, repeat their diagnosis, say what was on their plan for the day. It was a way, I think, for hospital staff to check that person's orientation to the world and to the day, and that's important, but that's not about who they are or their stories. We are not our diagnosis, right? One day, though, Matt said, we sat down for the group, and Matt said, "Good morning, my friends. We have a new member of the group, Barbara Gannon. Barbara's an intern, and she will be with us this year, and she wants to learn and understand mental illness better. I think the best way for her to learn is for you to teach her. It will be simple. You simply get to tell your stories and help Barbara see the ways that your illness has complicated your life. Who wants to help?" And a round of hands around the room. And I spent that year learning about individuals, hearing individual stories, and learning about the experience of true mental illness. The patient as the teacher, of course, who knows better, right? Who knows better for all of us? Our employees know more than we do. They know better. It was really my good fortune, Pat, to be able to be assigned to work with Dr. Dumont and the residents of the third floor that year. And I think I was able to take the book theory that I learned in class to the practice and the problems of daily living for these residents. It meant a lot to me and has served me to this day.
What a wonderful thing to have that juxtaposition and know that learning takes place between people in different roles, and you don't have to have a certain role to be a teacher. You can be a teacher and be anyone in the world if the environment is right and others are receptive to learning. What a great lesson. You know, you mentioned mental illness as a reaction to poverty, and I think in this age with COVID-19, it's something that has affected all of us, and it's affected people unevenly, and different people are having different reactions. You've talked in the past about how people respond to COVID-19 with burnout and ambiguous loss. Could you say something about sort of the effect this is having on us, and how people can grapple with it more successfully?
So I often think that we all have problems of living, and haven't our problems of living become exponential during COVID. It is how we get through our life. There is something about having our equilibrium upset, our routines, our connections, our perceptions of our safety and the safety of our loved ones. I think throughout my life, I have read widely to help me to understand the experience, what's going on, who has looked at this before. So my reading this year, I read the work of Drew Faust, who was president of Harvard and is a Civil War historian, talking about the importance of letter writing to families from a soldier who has died on the field, but the value of that. When you speak about ambiguous loss, I think that is what ambiguous loss is. Someone dying on a battlefield. To the family, they are here but not here. There is not any kind of finality to it or ability to really mourn. I think through our COVID-19 years, I've spent my days listening to colleagues and people who have said, this is really hard. They're in crisis, or they're in transition, or they're in loss from lack of daily routine, or things certainly changing, and not able to celebrate their lives. So as we have all experienced this, I've done some reading about ambiguous loss, the importance of being able to mourn in some way. And that's just not mourning the deaths, it is mourning a way of life. It is mourning not being able to see people. It is being able to understand that and make sense of it. I think that I will go to what have I done. Yes, I hid under a rock, as all of you did for a while. And then I figured out that what I needed to do is to find a routine to stay continually connected to myself. So I have had this small routine through COVID. Every morning I paint a 1-inch square. Watercolor paints. I'm not a painter. I'm not an artist, but it calms me. I capture in that one small square what's out my window, the landscape out my window. And I often will, because I'm in Gloucester near the ocean, I will note what level is the tide. I will note the temperature. I will say a few things. This has grounded me and helped me as I looked back over COVID season to be able to remember how I was doing throughout. I think that there are descriptions of different tides, and to me, the description of a slack tide is really that moment that I stop to take to paint that picture. So a slack tide is when the current in the tide is near zero. Especially at the moment when the tide begins to change in reverse direction, and you can actually catch it. It feels magical to me when I see the slack tide in the current. But I think it's a timeout. I think it's a chance to breathe. I think it's a chance for us to get ready for that next tide cycle. And I think it's finding that momentary peace that lets you stop and breathe and figure out, all right, I can do this. So I'm kind of wondering, Pat, as we're having this conversation, what are things that people have done that have helped to ground them or get their equilibrium back? So I'd like to invite people to take the chat and make a comment in the chat box. What is something like the painting of my postage stamp squares? What is the something in your day that has helped to keep your equilibrium balanced? So if you go to the chat box, that would be terrific.
Yeah, and use select the all panelists and attendees, and yes, please open the chat and tell us some of the things that you have done to achieve calm or equilibrium during this pandemic. All right, I like this. A daily 5-mile walk every day, no matter what. What are you seeing, Barbara, that
I'm
resonate?
seeing gratitude and meditation and read and daily inspiration cards. Don't they help?
Yep.
Lots of exercise, lots of getting out. It doesn't have to be big. It can be a daily walk with a dog or gardening or any of those things that you do. It is your time for the slack tide for you to regather yourself and wait for what's coming next.
These are beautiful. I send out words of encouragement to others, and that makes me happy. I love that. Angela Fogel. Think and do positive things. Try to keep any form of depressive things. Try to keep from any depressive things. More phone calls.
I find that the smile goes on my face when I get a call from someone who says, help me think about this. Whatever it is just, let's think about this together. And it kind of is that coaching, whatever, but to me, today, it's more of a really fine conversation and it makes my day.
So we're talking about things, and please, we're also taking your questions here for Barbara Gannon. You've responded beautifully to her prompt of things that you do to stay calm and maintain equilibrium. But please post in the chat function using all panelists and attendees. We'd love to hear your questions too. And my next question to you, Barbara, thinking about equilibrium and thinking about storytelling has to do with the Leadership Academy. And as we said in the introduction, you've led the Leadership Academy since its inception in 2008. Talk to me about what, in your view, makes that such a life-changing experience.
Well, it is something that the GannonConsult team looks forward to every year. We get to be there every year. You come to the Leadership Academy once and we get to keep experiencing it. Aren't we lucky? There is so much about the Leadership Academy experience, the individual growth, the lessons from faculty instructors who always say, this makes their day or their week or their year to be able to come and teach. I think that it is the ability for people to get re-energized about their work, to think about their next steps, to build relationships that we see from the LAAA last for many, many years. I think that as you asked earlier, what is important about the Leadership Academy, that's what it is. People often will talk, Pat, about the leadership workshops and the importance of those. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Leadership Academy, 1 hour every day during Leadership Academy, the class breaks into small groups of 10 or 12. And we work together, tell stories together, think together, support each other. And it is a way that the 36 in the room, 12 become even closer. I think that it is the facilitation of the workshop is important. Lindsay Robertson-Lentz and Kate Young and Maggie Wilkins and Paula Kellogg in the old days were all able to bring their study and learning of group dynamics. That's actually a thing, the study of group dynamics to the table, but also their interest and empathy to help people open up and work with each other. It is quite something. And often people will say, so tell me what the Leadership Academy is about and what does it mean and what is this leadership workshop? And often the response is, you just have to go. I can't tell you, you just have to go.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, it's definitely something people experience on a very deep level and on multiple levels, physically, mentally, socially, psychologically. Yeah, it's really what people refer to an immersive experience. I would say this is the ultimate immersive experience.
Well, I
Well,
think they also get to learn what it is like to sit around a table and notice behavior and notice hidden agendas and understand how somebody's trying to get in and can't, and what it means to step back as a leader. So I really think that it's those lessons that get learned in leadership workshop that add to that they can take back with them.
I was visiting a friend in another part of the state. I live in Northern Virginia in Washington, D.C., and it's very, hustle bustle and rush around. And I was in the southern part of the state, and my friend was talking about how it's quieter and it's calmer, and you get a palpable sense of people not rushing and they're slowing down. And I think that happens at the Leadership Academy too, is that people realize I don't have to rush to do the next thing, that it's okay for me to just dwell in this space and take off that sticky feeling of needing to rush or move on to the next thing. It's okay to just sit here and be in this moment. Even if I'm not necessarily in charge of something, something good is going to happen.
It can, in a sense, be the slack tide point in the Leadership Academy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, earlier this year, you and Maggie Wilkins did a virtual meetup called Leadership in Times of Uncertainty. And during that meetup, you quoted Robert Moore from his work On Trails. And the quote was, "To put it simply as possible, a path is a way of making sense of the world." Could you expand on that for us? Tell us a little bit more about that, the importance of a path.
I love the metaphor of a path as a way of making sense of this world, because I think we do that. As a psychologist, I learned to understand the path people were on. What happened, what happens before, what happens after, what happens during, what happens after. But I think that we think about COVID and we forget where we were in January and how hopeful we were. And on this session that you speak of, people wrote words that described how they felt in January. What we all hoped was then we could talk about COVID and how we feel now. And we thought we'd be out of it so we could talk about what's next as we move through the continuum, but also as we take that path through COVID. I think the path is our career path. How do we make sense of our careers? How do we make sense of our world? It is through that path, the story that we take, the twists and turns that we take, that the path metaphor comes to me.
Well, Barbara, I am going to make a couple of brief announcements, and then I'm going to return to you for some final words of wisdom. Okay?
Yeah.
So next week, our guest on Café IBTTA will be Tom Smith. Tom is the executive director of the American Society of Civil Engineers. So calling all engineers, this week is for you. Come on and join Tom Smith next week. Later today, we're having our first meeting of the book club on the book How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. It's 3 p.m. Eastern time today. Go to the website to register. And even if you haven't read the book, it's okay to join. I know you're going to find the discussion fascinating. December 1, Making Your Way to the Top. Industry executives share their stories and perspectives. This is presented by the Leadership Academy Alumni Association in partnership with the Mentorship Subcommittee, the Young Professionals Council, and the Women in Tolling Council. Check the IBTTA website for details on all our events. Well, Barbara, what final words of wisdom do you have for Leadership Academy alumni and all IBTTA members before we sign off?
I will say, tell your story. I will say, listen to other stories. I will say that reach out and call people talk to people, find out what's happening with them. There is nothing better than getting out of yourself and getting into somebody else to kind of lift the day. I find that the IBTTA community is one that is warm and welcoming, and even when we can't meet together. I'm going to say something that Pat doesn't know I'm going to say, but when people think about membership in associations this year, they think about their budgets and they think about how do we balance this. And I think that membership in IBTTA is an investment in the future, in future generations who you want to come through IBTTA experiences. Just because you may not see the same benefit of in-person meetings, you have had it in the past, you have banked that, and you get to bank it in the future by continuing to be involved, not just as a member, but be involved as a member. So thanks, Pat. This has been fun. I love talking to you anytime, and I hope I hear from some of you on the call.
Barbara, thank you so much for being with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and thanks for the investment of your time and your talent and your love in more than 400 professionals in the tolling industry of the last 13 years. It's been a wonderful ride, and we really appreciate your leadership and your tenderness in caring for the members of IBTTA. Well, thank you, the members of IBTTA. That's our Café IBTTA for this week. Be safe, keep in touch, and we'll see you down the road. Thanks, Barbara. Thanks, everybody.